So hello and welcome to the Pubway podcast. My name is Tina Yanakino.
And I'm Mike Villalobos, and today we're actually covering three major topics in the publisher ecosystem. The first one being basically the publisher and advertiser relationship. The second is what is the strategy when it comes to contextual within that publisher ecosystem. And then third, DE&I, and how that plays into just buying within advertisers and the role publishers play within offering that up to culture and community.
And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce my friend Justin Barton, who's the SVP of Digital Strategy and Partnerships at Black Enterprise. Justin, I'm sorry we're not in the south of France doing this interview right now.
No, it's okay. I'm glad to be here. Missing that great weather over there and everybody, but it's good to be home. So I'm glad to be able to do this with you, even if we're doing it remotely.
Wonderful. And before we dive into the content buckets that Mike just called out, I'd love to have our listeners hear a little bit more about your background to just give some context to why we're covering these topics today.
Yeah, so certainly I'm, like I said, Justin Barton, Senior Vice President of Digital Strategy and Partnership at Black Enterprise. So in this role, I'm in charge of everything from written content on site, the video content on site, to ad ops, programmatic, social, our new CTV offerings, podcasting. So pretty much everything that has to do with the digital realm, that's what I work on. Black Enterprise was a magazine that was started in 1970. And then in the 50th anniversary, which I believe was 2020, we sunset the magazine. So now we are a digital organization, and we always had a big events business. So we're a digital and events business that's focused on the Black community. So we are essentially, I like to say, the Black Forbes or Fortune of the media space. And that's what we do. And in my career, I started out in media finance at Disney ABC Domestic Television. And then I moved over. I worked for Viacom, I've worked for iHeart, I've worked for Daily Mail in various roles, whether it's finance to analytics to audience development, and now pretty much running the whole host of, like I said, functions at Black Enterprise. So well-versed in the industry, been around for a while, a little over 10 years. So, always happy to speak about different subjects that we're going to talk about today.
So you're basically the Jote. The Justin of all trades.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Never thought of that, but I will use that in the future.
Well, cool, man. I think just to kick things off, in your perspective, I think brand safety is a massive concern, I think, across every brand or advertiser's mind. My question is it the publisher, the advertiser, the agency's job to find brand safety? And how do you define that, right? I think because now suitability is now in the conversation of, what is right for one is not right for all, and vice versa. So what are your thoughts, I guess, brand safety? Who holds that responsibility? Is it a joint responsibility?
Well, I think it's somewhat joint responsibility. So when you say defining brand safety, that really happens at the brand/agency side, them giving us the, let's say, keywords or whatever they're looking to not be shown next to, different categories they might not want, news being one possibly. And then from the publisher side, it's for us to, essentially execute on this. So looking at the IO, making sure that we're putting all those brand safety terms into the system, and then making sure that we don't put their advertising next to those type of subject matters. So, one of the big things that you always hear in the media space, especially, having me work for the Daily Mail and other places like Black Enterprise, is that, a lot of people don't want to be seen. A lot of advertisers don't want to be seen around news. And I think, we try to push back on that, saying there's a lot of news out there that's newsworthy, and it's not everything in news is bad, right? There are things that you must be next to. News drives a lot of traffic to the site. So basically sectioning off news and saying you can't place our ads next to news does hurt, us, the media companies, financially. But at the same time, you're losing a lot of engaged, visitors to the site who might be engaging with your ads. So there's one thing, for example, when I worked at Daily Mail, if you have like a plane crash, putting ads next to that, that's not good. Or back in the day, ISIS beheadings next to ads, not good. But it's different when you're talking about social justice, which we talk a lot about, or DEI or things that might be considered quote unquote woke. Those aren't necessarily, those are just buzzwords to me. But I think that, we try to work with the agencies and the brands to know that we want to expand their advertising towards that, because they're worthwhile conversations that our audience wants to hear about, and they're very engaged, and it'll be great to have their ass next to. So it's just really a give and take and an education process, working with the agency to see that these subject matters are not something that should be off limits.
That's fair. I think so. It'd be helpful to understand some of like the collaboration tactics you've done in the past in terms of like, how do you make someone feel comfortable? And because I think you hit the nail on the head of, you have to educate the advertisers so they feel comfortable. Any tactics that you've done in the past that like someone can pick up from, and maybe anecdotally what you've done to, breed that like that, or foster that comfortability?
Well, I think, certainly having a really great relationship with multiple different groups higher up at the agency or the holding company is the way to go. So we have different relationships with high-end folks who work at the agency where they know a lot of the issue that Black media tends to have is that there are a lot of terms that are in these keyword block lists that hurt us, because there are terms that we use all the time that are not necessarily negative, but it's a list that was created who knows how many years ago, and it's causing us to have difficulties delivering because we can't show ads against that. So really speaking with those people at the agency who can talk to different planning groups and say, hey, this is essentially, these terms are not necessarily negative, so let's remove them for the list. Let's remove some of these targetings from the list. Especially when you're dealing with minority-owned Black media, minority-targeted media, those type of things. So that's really what the education process is really having people higher up at the agencies really work with the planning teams and say, hey, okay, this is, it's not going to work. We're not going to scale as well if you have these terms that are maybe general market terms and trying to apply it to, certain media companies. And that's really the main discussion. So it's just, cooperation and working with the agency to free up some of those terms.
Absolutely. And I feel like also hitting the nail on the head with audience targeting, it's evolving. It's not going away, especially with the decline of cookie-based tracking on the horizon. Google, as we know, keeps moving the goalposts, but seemingly 2024 is the next renaissance of this movement. And of course, publishers are continue to face new challenges and opportunities for generating revenue there. And Black enterprise in particular, I know you have a very strong direct sales strategy. You have those relationships, but how do you see post-cookie revenue strategies changing for publishers with that direct sales strategy in mind and the open web and the evolution there?
Yes. So Black enterprise is in I would say a very positive situation where, we have a lot of contextual content that works for the African-American Black community. So if you're trying to reach that audience, you can reach us in a contextual basis. And like you mentioned, Tina, we are very, very direct sold through. So the cookie apocalypse, while I understand why a lot of organizations and media companies are, very worried about it, when you're not so reliant on programmatic open marketplace, it really helps you as an organization, because if they want to reach this audience, they now can say, cherry pick and say, I can find the Black audience on NBA.com or ESPN.com or BuzzFeed. You have to come to media companies that have that audience contextually, and then you could put the ads, display, banner, video right next to that. And I think so for us, it's a positive, the cookie apocalypse. But I understand, obviously organizations that are 95% or 100% programmatic, it does hurt them because they have a wide swath of audiences on their site. And now it's hard to activate against it because there's just that unknown as to, exactly if this is the right person the advertiser will be getting if they advertise with this, media company. So for us, it's a positive, but not for everybody.
A bit of a tangential question I have that kind of popped up over the last week or so was, not all cookies are made equally, right? So third parties are going away, but I think there's a lot of first-party data strategies happening within publishers. Do you guys have a first-party data strategy kind of baking in place, and how do you guys look at that?
Yeah, we do slightly. And, for everybody, like logged in audiences are very small, but, we do have a substantial email newsletter list. And we, like I said, we put on events. So we have a lot of deep data onto a sizable percentage of our audience saying we know their name, their address, where they live, what profession they're in, what company they work for. So we have a lot of first party data that we could target off of there. But as for a logged in audience, we've not, pushed that as a requirement or put up a paywall or done stuff to make people take the next step. We want people to get to our site and engage with the content. But looking forward, you say 2024, moving forward there, it might be something that we decide to do is, give some kind of incentive or limit the amount of content people can see just by not logging in. If you log in, then fine, you get it. We're not trying to paywall you, get money from you that way, but we're just trying to get a little bit more information about who comes to the site. So there's different things we might do in the future, but right now we're just collecting all the information, the first party data we can on as many users who want to be engaged with Black Enterprise on a monthly basis, on a daily basis with our daily newsletter, and with our events business, in-person, virtual, town halls, whatever it may be, capturing data and information on individuals that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think it opens up an interesting conversation around, especially with when you're trying to reach specifically Black audiences, it goes to, are you reaching Black owned or the Black audience? And we've seen all the media commitments come out, and there's kind of these nuances between the two. And of course, there's overlap, but when you use contextual, you're not necessarily going towards how someone self-identifies, but you're going to the interest, which might happen to align to the community that the advertiser is trying to reach. So there's so many nuances there. And I think there is some confusion as well. And for Justin, we've talked before about the Black tech tax and having to kind of pay to prove who you are. And I'd love to hear kind of your perspective, as we've talked in other rooms, but on this podcast now.
Yeah. So I think it's like the two questions you have are kind of interrelated. So the first one is, Black owned media versus Black targeted media. So Black Enterprises, Black owned media, where I won't name too many organizations, but let's say if you see through the news what Group Black is trying to do, if they're successful in it, whether it was Bustle, whether it was Vice, or whether it's the Arena Group, that's not even Black targeted, that's Black owned. But then you have Black targeted, which would be more of like a BET where they are now, maybe like The Root, those type of organizations. So, there is something to, and what we push the agencies on is, and brands are, for Black owned, because we're capitalized in a way, and our mission needs to be funded to give Black audiences certain content. I think, I always hear Roland Martin talk about this. It's one of the things he always says. It's like, we give sometimes the Black media organizations the lowest common denominator of content. It's always like entertainment based, and it's always like sports. But what Black Enterprise does, we're business. We're Forbes and Fortune. We want to do business, or we want to do high-end lifestyle, right? And I think the only way you can really do non-aggregated content in that way is if Black publishers are getting dollars that are funded to reaching that audience, and not necessarily, funding Black-owned groups that are now essentially targeting, general market audiences, or giving money to, public companies that are targeting Black audiences. It's best if the Black-owned media is able to really take that, the revenue, and then hire more editors, which I've done a lot at Black Enterprise, and then put people on the streets and make sure they're going to all the events and reporting. We want to do that. So I think that's one. And then two, you're talking about sort of like the Black tax. There are, a lot of networks and, Black SSPs that are out there, and they get some of that, they're Black owned, and they get some of those dollars, and then they take their percentage, and then then the DSP takes their percentage, and then it comes to us. And then, so that is sort of like the Black tax. If you, not have that SPO, and you're kind of going around the Black media companies, it's just, everybody deals with it obviously throughout the industry, but it's, especially an issue for Black owned media. If it's a shoestring company, or, you're trying to make things happen, is that you're having 20, 30, 40% being taken out before it reaches you. So we try to push a lot of like different types of SPOs, not necessarily the ones you read in the news where, DSPs just going right to publishers, or SSPs going around DSPs. It's more of like, how can we have direct relationships with the demand partners and get as much of the piece of the pie of that CPM as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, you touched on an interesting point with the general market note. Obviously, Black enterprise is very apparent on what you stand for and what you're covering, but there are a ton of Black media owners who their website might mimic the general market just based on their audience and the content topics they cover. That does not mean they should be shifted away from that media investment as an advertiser who might be looking at the audience and going to the nuances of own versus audience. But
yeah, that's a good thing. Just I'll mention, like, so obviously we have good SEO at Black Enterprise. So if you look at our audience, a huge percentage, probably like 40%, are not Black because people are typing in a subject into Google or Bing or Yahoo, and they're coming to our site just because we have that information. So it's not that, we're not targeting that audience, but we're putting the information out there. And if our information ranks high, we have no problem, displaying that content and the advertising. So not against that, but yeah, they're just, we're very deliberate in making sure we're pushing forward our mission. And when we speak to the agencies and brands, making sure that we're deliberate in saying this is where you should run this media because we are Black owned and we are Black targeted.
I was actually going to kind of tailwind on that real quickly, but like, when you create content, are you creating content with the intent for a certain audience or inclusivity? Like, I guess, how do you look at the content strategy and where do you start and where does it end, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it is deliberate. So we are pushing forward content. Most of it has some type of, Black angle. So it's, Black entrepreneurship, or this is what's happening in the Black news space, or this was happening in the social justice space. But then again, being a business publication, sometimes it's like, here's what's happening, in the markets right now. Here's a better way to do personal finance, so there's a give and take there. But like today, obviously, with the decision coming down from the Supreme Court, it's Thursday, and we have to talk about that. So with affirmative action, so there's a whole host of things depending on what the news cycle brings us that we talk about. But then there's a whole bunch of other content that's just evergreen in nature, and there are always people in our audience who are creating new businesses that are pushing forward new ideas. And helping drive Black business that we report on a day-to-day basis. And that always happens. So we try to take local stories that we see throughout the nation and bubble them up to become national stories. And that's been a big success for us.
And I think too, and we kind of touched upon context before, but kind of in promoting audience diversity, how do you think context can help kind of play that crucial role, especially when it comes to avoiding labeling or stereotyping?
Yeah, The content space is very difficult, and this is actually the first time, like I mentioned, that I get to run content and push it out there. And I would say, you have to be careful the way you report things. And, what we try to do really is take news in general and give it to the Black audience in our voice and be an authentic voice to the Black audience. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're not trying to do anything in a stereotypical sense or anything like that. We're just trying to give the audience news that they might not see or they might get from a general media company and not trust it as much. So be that authentic voice that talks to every subject. So Black Enterprise DNA has always been in business. But like I said, we do like news, we do social justice, we do lifestyle, we do arts and culture. We do travel. We handle all those things, and we try to be a trusted, authentic voice for our audience.
All right, so I'm gonna shift gears and give you something you probably heard 1,000 times in Cannes. AI.
Sure.
sure that didn't come up at all again, but I think where do you see artificial intelligence or even like machine learning models playing within your own kind of approach in the next 5 to 10 years? And do you think the release of, say, like ChatGPT and generative AI, do you think that's changed your perspective on publishing, copywriting, et cetera?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I'm looking at right now is the copywriting portion of it. Not trying to take anybody's jobs, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure every article that goes out, and we're doing 30 to 50 articles a day at Black Enterprise, is, the copy editing is done perfect. And I think, we have copy editors, but at the same time, if it can be done more efficiently and right away, it doesn't require a human to sit there and go through it and then slow down the process. You want to get the news out as quickly as possible. So I think that's the first thing, just copy AI, Notion, different places. I'm just looking at that. Haven't necessarily put anything in motion yet, but certainly that's what I'm looking for in the short term, meaning within the next 3 months. A little bit shorter, longer term is, certainly what can be written in an authentic voice via AI. And I think there's, I'm a big believer in investing in editorial talent. So I would never be the person to say, let's get rid of editorial writers and talent. I think it's extremely important, and that's what I invest in. But at the same time, there's certain stories that might, almost like news press releases that can be auto-generated, but flipped into something, into an article that's more readable and not as preachy, not as, standard PR tactics. So, I think that's the next step, looking there where things can be done in that respect. But, even in, when I do certain events at Black Enterprise and I'm moderating, I've actually been using, AI to help me generate the questions I ask, because it comes up with such great questions. So there's a whole host of things I think you'll see in the future. It's not necessarily a job destroyer. People who can harness the power of AI, I think, will do great. And certainly a generation younger than me, they'll be much better at it. But I'm trying to keep abreast of all the new things that are coming out and trying to test it out and play with it and see where I can utilize it to make the job I do more efficient, the people who work for me more efficient.
It's almost like a scale and check, the way I've looked at it, right? Like, it allows you to scale in the sense that you can mass produce, and then you have someone with a talent of copywriting or writing in general to actually check, add nuance, or take away,
Sure.
anything that may be biased or false. And then that scale and check component, right? But I love that approach for sure, just because now you're producing 60, 80 articles a day versus 20.
Correct. Yeah. And that's sort of the game. Like, at the end of the day, and things have changed big time with traffic generation, but a lot of it used to be like sort of like the hockey stick, like a few articles get the most traffic a day, and you're trying to hit on some. So you're right, going from 50 to 80, maybe you hit on 2 or 3 more articles a day, and that increases your UVs over a month by like 2, 3, 4 million. So there is opportunity there, but you want, especially for us, we want the content to be authentic, and just seeing how the voice of the AI turns out is something to look forward to in the future. And it could be something great, or it might not work. But I think as the more data you put into it, the more like LLMs, get better understanding of even like, the Black voice in a way our writers write. It could be something substantial in the future.
I think what's fascinating too is if you look at the right training sets, right? So not for nothing, but like if you look when Google first came out, they had a ton of biases coming into play because they had a lot of skewed visions or training sets. Whereas now, if you're actually building it off of, say, Black Enterprise as a domain, you're kind of catching that voice that you already had and carrying it forward. So I would say like your data is only as good as your training set, and the training set and the generation of that actually matters. So I think this is going to be a really big revolutionary movement, but we'll see how it plays out in the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, clearly you've been around the block a few times, and how you've seen the landscape evolve over those years. I guess, how do you see it evolving even more with the kind of AI in mind over the next few years? Like, what opportunities do you foresee for publishers that are kind of on the horizon that you're most excited about?
Like I said, things have changed, and they always change. So there's always ups and downs. I've always been sort of in the mind of, I want to run the business model that makes the most sense for the company I work for. And, in Black Enterprise, we were very low when I got here, probably 400,000 UVs. And then we hit a max of 13 million UVs. And now we're down, somewhere like 8 million. But I think over the time, it's like, how can we continue to give our audience and expand our audience to seeing our content? And the traffic sources always change, and the mediums always change. And I think what I'm looking forward to right now, like I mentioned before, we're having an events business and capturing all this content video-wise, and having virtual events, and having 7 weekly shows that we do, and having town halls, is really looking to the CTV, OTT, fast space, and seeing how we can be a voice. Right now, especially in the AA Black space, or all the fast networks, most of what you see there is either movies or entertainment content. And I think, like I mentioned before, I think there's an appetite for having higher end content that's about business, that's about leisure. And it's, I think arts and culture, lifestyle. And I think that's what I want to see if Black enterprise could tap into. And the deals that I'm making right now around that space, we're trying to bring our content with a programming guide and put it out there so we can expand our audience from just sort of like the web digital portion app that we have now to the big screen. So, it's certainly so many things are changing over the years, and that's what I'm looking to see if that's an avenue. Obviously, podcasting is big now, but there's different things that we could be doing out there, and we want to make sure we're touching all the different mediums. Magazine used to be a big media for Black enterprise for 30 plus years, 40 years, but now we're into digital, we're into events, and hopefully, online video in a big sense.
Yeah, I think all of us, it'd be silly to not have CTV on your radar in some form at this point. And I think there's a really cool opportunity. I'm not sure if you're dealing in like the creator economy at all, but helping leverage voices in the community, using your platform to get them into those channels, like that could be an absolutely amazing opportunity for sure.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, there's so many people who are doing great work who don't have that exposure. And what Black enterprise has is a megaphone. So we've done a lot of different things. One is called Green Enterprise, which is about, the marijuana business within, Black business. And, a whole bunch of other people are doing podcasts out there that could be simulcast and put out there and the message gets out. So we're trying to work with creators to fill out our schedule and help them monetize and at the same time give them the big voice. So then if they have to go off on their own, they'll have that opportunity. But, it helps us with content. It helps them with exposure. And I think that quid pro quo is something that we're working on right now as we continue to build out more and more content video-wise. So I think, creator economy is huge and it's something to be reckoned with, because if you think about it, you look at like a show that might be like the nightly news or even any cable news or whatever it may be, it might do like 2-3 million people watch it, but you can have a creator that does something and you have 40 million views. So there is more captivity there, and I think there's more of an audience there, and I think that's the way that media agencies and brands and publishers should be looking towards.
I think with to your point of like things to look forward to, what excites you the most looking into the next 12 to 18 months in terms of technology, opportunity, or just the market in general?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is it's what it's been since, I would say, mid-pandemic, especially for the work that I do, is, working to continue to push forward with direct sales and getting that in the door, moving more people from open market to PMPs or PGs, and with the cookie apocalypse coming, may or may not come, but, making sure that people are looking at this contextual marketplace, working with the SPOs, and making sure that we're getting, rid of a lot of the black tax as we talked about before. So there's a lot going on always. I used to focus a lot on traffic sources, but now I'm kind of like, this is where things are and you have to adapt. But, certainly looking at different ways of reaching our audience, that's what I'm excited for, is the simplification of a lot of the, I would say, ad tech stack. And in addition to that, really looking at ad net zero as well. What is the best way to, get our carbon footprint down in the industry and pushing towards that in 2030. So those are the things that I'm kind of working towards. But, you have a lot of balls in your air. We're juggling them and hopefully, everything will land in an appropriate spot when the time is right. So I'm very hopeful for the industry. I like being in this industry. That's why I've been in it for, 10 to 15 years. And it continues to change. Everything we did 2, 3, 5 years ago is totally different now. So always looking forward what the next thing is going to happen for us.
I love it.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, this has been amazing. And I'd love to kind of end with one more question. And you've shared so many nuggets already, but I would love to know personally, what's the best and worst advice that you've ever received? That can be career related or personal related. You can choose.
The best advice is probably, Justin, talk a little less and listen more. But no, I think the best advice, the best advice I give, I would say, is, always look for people who have intellectual curiosity, always work with them, and always work with, partners who are in the publishing space. So I think I've always been throughout my career I go to different organizations, and there's a mixed match of vendors, of partners that are marketing ones that shouldn't be with publishing. So that is, the thing that I tell people, and that's the best advice that I've gotten is, make sure you're working with the right partners and turning transactional relationships into personal relationships. And the worst advice I've ever gotten, I can't think of anything right now. But it's like, hey, Justin, get out there and talk more, because sometimes I could be a gaffe a minute. But no, I think that, I think that certainly, I say listening more and learning from everybody in the industry is the best advice I would have given and get from people.
Totally. And I love the common thread of, I think we're all in the same boat. It's continuing to just a publisher advocate. Without the publisher, there's no industry. So we all have to kind of be on the same page for supporting and always moving forward. This has been wonderful, Justin. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Tina and Mike, thank you for having me. I'm glad we got to do this.
We'll do the rain check in Cannes, I promise.
Yes.
All right, next year.
Exactly. Venture here we come.
All right, my friend. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you.